Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namide Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Rama. This visit, anticipating the appearance day of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Gaura Purnima, the topics are mostly going to be Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, Gaura Lila, and I just randomly picked some topics. So the first topic this evening is Lord Chaitanya's life as a Nimai Pandit scholar, teaching Sanskrit grammar, and the pastime is Kesava Kashmiri. The story of Kesava Kashmiri is narrated both, maybe narrated in all the other places as well, but Chaitanya Bhagavat and Chaitanya Charitamrita. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, elaborate commentary on Chaitanya Bhagavat. And I'll blend back and forth between Bhaktisiddhanta and Srila Prabhupada's purports. First of all, Kesava Kashmiri was a great devotee, very devoted to Goddess Saraswati. And in Bhaktisiddhanta's unique style, he describes that the original Saraswati is the goddess of fortune, as Lakshmi is to Narayan. So Goddess Saraswati is another name or a particular aspect of the goddess of fortune. He doesn't write this, but for example, because I like Brahma Samhita, when Lord Brahma received the first of his mantras, who did he receive that mantra from? Saraswati. And it's not his wife, because there was no wife. There was nothing. The lotus flower and darkness in all directions and Lord Brahma. So, climbed down the lotus stem, couldn't find its end of the stem, he heard tapa, he went back up. And the tapa that he performed was chanting of his mantra. And the mantra that he received, the first of the two mantras that he received, was from Saraswati. Have you ever wondered? Now you can stop wondering. What Saraswati did he receive this mantra from? The goddess of fortune, Saraswati. An aspect of her known by the name Saraswati. And the same Saraswati is worshipable by Vaishnavas, just as Lakshmi is worshipable by Vaishnavas in relation to the Shaktiman, but worshipable. So this Kesava Kashmiri, Bhaktisiddhanta describes, he had a problem. He didn't write like that, but his problem was pride. And it was a very elaborate explanation, very highly philosophical explanation of what is pride and what's the consequence of pride. And the consequence of pride is the spiritual reality is blocked. And instead, one may receive something from the reflection of the internal potency or the spiritual potency of the spiritual realm. And that's this goddess Saraswati that materialistic persons or proud persons, even Vedic proud persons, worship. And he was such an ardent worshiper of Saraswati that she appeared before him. The goddess of fortune, the goddess, the material goddess Saraswati, gave him a benediction. And she kept her word, with one exception. And the word was, she would enlighten his tongue. His speaking would always be her speaking through him. And he would always be victorious in presenting the teachings and philosophies and scholarship. So he was a very accomplished scholar, and he was very proud. That's not a good combination. Pride is not a good anything, but that was one of his characteristics. And with this benediction from Saraswati, he did what scholars of the time would do. And now going to Prabhupada's commentary on this Kesava Kashmiri story, just as in modern times, there are sports people, and they compete, and the victorious ones is, yay, he's the victor, and the other one's the loser. And in more towards the mode of goodness, or in Vedic times, there may be passion and ignorance mixed with goodness, but it was kind of like a sport. That scholarly people would travel from place to place, and they would challenge somebody to a debate. Now, normally when there's a debate, there's kind of like, who's going to decide who wins, because you got to have a referee or something, because who's going to say who won? That description isn't there, but the debate can go on and on and on. And one of the acknowledgments of being defeated is one remains silent. Prabhupada describes it in his conversations with different people. So he Kesava Kashmiri, he called Kashmiri because he's from Kashmir. Kashmir is a very beautiful place, pristine, topographically and so forth. He traveled throughout India, and one of the businesses in going to travels throughout India is he'd go to holy places where there especially a congestion or a strong number of elevated scholarly Vaishnavas. He would make it his business to find out who's the most scholarly person in that place, and he would challenge them to a debate. And if they debated with him and they were defeated, then he somehow gets some acknowledgement, a written verification that they've been defeated. We know like this happened with Rupa Goswami, right? Traveling, challenging debater, and, oh, you're too smart. There's no purpose in debating you. I'll just accept defeat even before there's a debate. Very good. Give me a written verification you've been defeated. The practice not only was a debate and one is defeated and one is the victor, but the one who's defeated becomes the disciple of the one who's the victor. And the disciple of the one who's defeated becomes the disciple of the victor. In this way, they would have many, many, many followers. And there was like gathering followers was the program. And the medium of gathering followers was debate and being very skilled in debate. What to speak of having a blessing from Goddess Saraswati, you can never be defeated. So he was really fired up and very proud. And the way it's described is he had traveled throughout the length and breadth of India, and one of the places remaining for him to visit was Navadvip, because at that time Navadvip was one of the seats of higher learning, meaning many brahmanas, and amongst them many brahmanas, many very capable, elevated brahmanas. So he was, rubbing his hands together. I'm going to go to Navadvip and get more followers. That was his plan. And the description that's not, because Krishnadas Kaviraj was careful, purposely careful, he repeated some pastimes that were previously covered by Vrindavan Das Thakur in Chaitanya Bhagavat, but he didn't replicate, he didn't say the same thing that was already said, but he spoke other things that were not said, or wrote other things that were not said. So in Chaitanya Bhagavat, it's said, when Kesava Kashmiri came to town, he had a big retinue. There were elephants, there were chariots, there were a whole big shebang coming to town. Here comes Kesava Kashmiri. And in Vrindavan Das Thakur's very special, sweet style, he described how the Brahmana community in Navadvip responded when Kesava Kashmiri came to town. They kind of scattered. They started to panic and what's going to happen? He's got this reputation and he's really good. And we don't have the goddess of Saraswati in the tips of our tongue like he does. And so what are we going to do when he challenges us? So they were intimidated. And that was part of his program. He would intimidate people, and then he'd try to beat them up philosophically and be victorious. Digvijay. It's a title that means, travel and defeat people. Digvijay. So when he came to Navadvip, he started asking, who's the most learned person? Many of the Brahmanas had scattered, but he heard about this young scholar in Navadvip who was a teacher in Sanskrit. Vyakarana is the procedure. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur writes that there are different systems of Vyakarana. There's the Panini system and then two other systems, and that's not the system. Panini was not the system that Nimai Pandit followed, but he was very expert. And the procedure was young boys for 12 years would just study grammar. You study anything for 12 years, you got to be good at it. But it's the root of Sanskrit teachings. So when becoming thoroughly versed in the root of Sanskrit teachings or the Vedas, you could have access to the Vedas. And say it conversely. Without it, you don't have the same access to the Vedas. And one of the procedures in Vyakarana was learning the root words or dhatu. I don't know, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but this much I know. And then they, the young boys or the students of Vyakarana, they would learn different ways of reading or defining or taking the definition of a particular word based upon dhatu. Then you connect this dhatu with that suffix and that prefix, and you can get different meanings derived from the dhatu. So they could interpret texts in multiple ways. Interpret, that's like, scholarship without descending knowledge, just scholarship to get access to knowledge or the Vedas. But you have to have the Vyakarana. So it's a detail that's described in Chaitanya Bhagavat that's not in Chaitanya Charitamrita is one evening, Nimai Pandit was there by the bank of the Ganges with thousands of students. Now, I don't know how you give a class by the bank of the Ganges with thousands of students. You don't have a speaker system. But somehow that's the description. And when he saw Nimai Pandit, he was moved by his beauty, his demeanor, his character just kind of went in all directions. He could understand this is a very special person. And he was on the hunt for, somebody to debate with. So the Chaitanya Bhagavat description and the Chaitanya Charitamrita description differ a little bit. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita description, Kesava Kashmiri, introduced himself and then asked, are you Nimai Pandit? Tell me what you do. I've heard something about you. And Nimai Pandit replied with humility, like profound humility. I'm a little person with, I teach Sanskrit to a few students, and I think I know who you are. You're Kesava Kashmiri. You're a celebrity. And there was back and forth where, at least according to Prabhupada's explanation, Kesava Kashmiri was sarcastically commenting about how trivial and insignificant was being a grammar teacher, and conversely how he was so skilled in composition and in knowledge and give orations. And so Nimai went along with the fun, and he said, I've heard about your scholarship. Would you be so kind? We're by the side of the Ganges here. Could you recite some verses that give the glories of the Ganges? Now, there's a different version. The version in Chaitanya Bhagavat, he went on for hours. He didn't stop. He just went on and on and on, glorifying the Ganges in poetry, Sanskrit poetry. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, he recited 100 verses and then stopped. And then there was a discussion between the two, where Nimai Pandit said, which many people said, your speaking is so elevated. How can one possibly understand it? It's so elevated. Yes, it's so elevated. Hardly anyone can understand it. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, or Nimai Pandit at the time, said, could you, to help me understand, can we take one of those verses and examine it very carefully so you could explain to me the verse, the intention behind the verse? So I have the verse. At least what's in Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is a detail that's not in Chaitanya Bhagavat. So this doesn't say which of the 100 verses, but here's the verse. Oh, Kesava Kashmiri said, which verse? And Lord Chaitanya said, this one, and he recited the verse verbatim. The greatness of Mother Ganges always brilliantly exists. She is the most fortunate because she emanated from the lotus feet of Vishnu, the personality of Godhead. She is a second goddess of fortune, and therefore she is always worshipped both by demigods and by humanity. Endowed with all wonderful qualities, she flourishes on the head of Lord Shiva, which sounds poetic and very nice. And Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Kesava Kashmiri was stunned. How are you able to remember so many verses flowing like the wind, and you remember verbatim one of those verses? And Nimai said, some people are gifted this way, some people are gifted that way. Your gift is reciting Sanskrit poetry, my gift is memory. And all gifts that anyone has comes from the personality of Godhead anyways. Yad yad vibhuti mat. The vibhutis or opulences of the Supreme Lord are sometimes endowed in this way to this one or that way to that one, but it's all an opulence of the personality of Godhead from Bhagavad Gita. So you have this gift, I have that gift. And he was still amazed. He's just a young teacher, a grammar teacher. Then Nimai asked him, could you explain it? The very nice verse. And he went on giving his explanation of the very nice verse. And then he said, oh, very nice. Could you describe to me what the qualities and the faults are in that verse? And a little proud, he said, well, there's only good qualities. There's no faults. And then Nimai listed the qualities. There's this, that, the other, and the other, and the other. He listed 5 literary alankara, literary ornaments, and he expressed them explicitly. Because he's a grammar student, he knows all these rules about poetry. And then he said, what are the faults? And he said, there are no faults. And then Nimai gave him a list of faults. And it's technical, and it's like many pages of technical, and I'm not going to go through all the technical. And Kesava Kashmiri was stunned. Now, normally when something like this takes place among scholars, they have a reply. But he had no reply. His intelligence went on a vacation. And he could understand from this that Goddess Saraswati was displeased by something that he had done. And so Nimai made light of it and suggested, why don't you consider this conversation, and tomorrow we can meet again, you can recite some more wonderful poetry. So Kesava Kashmiri went to wherever he went to for the evening, mulling over what had just happened. And again, he could understand. Saraswati was somehow not pleased with me. I've never had this happen before, because she gave me this benediction. And if he's never disappointed me, it must be I've made some mistake or some offense. And I don't know what that is. I don't know what her reason for doing this is. So that night, there's a beautiful, I think it's a Pushkar painting, where he has a dream. And in his dream, he sees Nimai Pandit. Behind Nimai Pandit, he sees Radha and Krishna, etc., etc. He understands the divinity. So Saraswati appeared to him in his dream and instructed him. I have given you strength and capacity to speak wonderfully. But where does that capacity come from? It comes from the personality of Godhead. And he's the personality of Godhead. So before him, I can't speak. I can't say anything. So you can't say anything either. So you should understand who he is. And tomorrow morning, when you first get up in the morning, you go and you prostrate yourself before him, beg forgiveness, and accept him as the personality of Godhead. And she disappeared in the dream. During that discussion, just a detail, Lord Chaitanya points out there's a rule from Bharata Muni about poetry. Bharata Muni indicated that, it's a verse from his writings about poetry, if there's even one fault in a poem or a composition, then it's like a spot of leprosy on a body, and this whole thing becomes contaminated. The poetry is worthless. It should be discarded. So, here's a grammar student telling him about rules of poetry. And he just composed all this fantastic poetry that had not just one, but a number of faults. And then he went on to say, all of your poetry was filled with faults, filled with ornaments, and filled with faults. See you tomorrow morning. Yeah. The capacity for someone to recognize transcendence, where does it come from? Where the same place that everything comes from. Illusion also comes from the same source, but to recognize truth comes from the same source. So Saraswati informed Kesava Kashmiri, you were speechless because I couldn't speak. I couldn't get on your tongue and say something. Because you haven't recognized him as the personality of Godhead. And you can't recognize him because you're too proud. You become proud by the gifts that I've given you, but you think yourself the owner of that gift. And therefore, you can't recognize transcendence. It's a detail, but it's a really nice detail. In Kena Upanishad, Bhaktisiddhanta narrates a passage from Kena Upanishad where the personality of Godhead assumes the form of a yaksha. What's a yaksha? Yakshas are followers of Kuvera. They're residents of this in between the earth and Swarga. They're followers of Kuvera. They're powerful. They're warriors. So the personality of Godhead assumed the form of a yaksha, and the yaksha was standing in the road, and the way that narration in Kena Upanishad reads, they requested the yaksha. This is first Agni came and said, "Could you please move? You're blocking the path." And he said, "Yes, but first, here's a blade of grass. See if you can ignite this blade of grass." And with all of his Agni power, he couldn't ignite the blade of grass. And then along came Vayu and said, "You're blocking the path. Can you please get out of the way?" He said, "Yes, but first, please, here's a blade of grass. With all the force of your wind, you please move the blade of grass." And he couldn't move the blade of grass. So then the yaksha revealed, because you're proud, you can't recognized the personality of Godhead, revealed his identity as the personality of Godhead. Kena Upanishad. So the similarity is, so similarly, the Kesava Kashmiri couldn't recognize Nimai Pandit to be the personality of Godhead, but the goddess Saraswati revealed who he was. Later, it's described that he became a great devotee of Lord Chaitanya, and in course of time, because he was very, very scholarly, he received Diksha in the Nimbarka Acharya line, and he became a great scholar in Nimbarka Acharya line, and he wrote various writings glorifying the personality of Godhead. So it was a big switcheroo from the position of a prideful person. So we've, in our Hare Krishna movement, we've all had the good fortune of meeting prideful people here and there from time to time. And it's not easy. But something that we're going to hear over the next few days. Humility is very... Sometimes people say, don't be humble because people will take advantage of you. But humility has its own power and its own purity. And of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is not just humble, he's the personality of Godhead. But with that Shakti of the personality of Godhead, he persuaded, or he moved the heart of a very prideful, blessed by Saraswati personality to come to the stage of accepting the personality of Godhead as a young fellow, a young teacher of grammar. So I thought that would be a nice place to start in preparation for Gaura Purnima, just to meditate on, hear about, remember the way this, because at this stage Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had not begun his Sankirtan pastimes. We're going to hear about that tomorrow, at least I plan to speak about it tomorrow. And his divinity was concealed purposefully. At the same time, he, it's converting a proud Digvijay Pandit to become a humble Vaishnava, at that, an exalted Vaishnava, was no small undertaking. When Nimai pointed out the faults, and Kesava Kashmiri was speechless, his students started to laugh. He told them, no. He's a very elevated person. Don't laugh. Respect him. So he was teaching by example and teaching by his words. Now, we don't have this capacity, but that's okay. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has that capacity. And we glorify him for how he did what he did, and the gift of transforming the heart of someone who was very proud to someone who he had become very humble. Gifted person. I think I'm going to end with that and see if there's some discussion. You're the microphone carrier? That's your service? At least tonight. In the back?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for telling that pastime. I always like that point about how Nimai Pandit told his students not to laugh, because it just makes me think how, he wasn't trying to cut him down, but he was being loving. He wanted to help him.
Yes.
And so it's just a nice reminder, I guess, for me, just thinking about when things happen, that it might not look so wonderful, but he has my best interest in mind, and he's trying to help.
Do you know the pastime where Duryodhana visited Indraprastha? And what looked like land was water, what water looked like land, and he fell into a pool that looked like land, and the queens were there, and the queens started laughing. And the respectful individual said, "Don't laugh." And Krishna said, "No, laugh, laugh." Why? Why? That, same person, Krishna and Krishna. Because at least in this particular pastime with Krishna, he wanted that Duryodhana would break, because they were cousins. And he had already attempted murder and so many diabolical things, but break him to the point where no turning back. Though he wanted the war. He wanted to, before leaving this world, that the demoniac elements be eliminated, and the instrument was the war. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has a different purpose, and we're followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We're also Krishna devotees. We don't encourage people to laugh when somebody's embarrassed. But Krishna did, for a purpose, transcendental purpose. And we're followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Yes, up front, over here. Raise your hand again so he can see you.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So, towards the end of the Mahabharata, just speaking before the war, Krishna goes as a peacemaker, right? He goes on behalf of Pandavas. So, if he really wanted to have the war, then it looks like in this instance, Krishna wants to give an opportunity for Duryodhana to at least give them 5 villages to the Pandavas. So I'm trying to understand, in that instance, what you just mentioned, Krishna wants Duryodhana to break down and have the war, but here Krishna seems to be trying to settle at least by having 5. How do you understand this?
First of all, he's omniscient. And being omniscient, he could have, there could have been a war without Krishna having the queens all laugh at him falling into the pond or into the pool. So what was he trying to accomplish? There was talk amongst the Kauravas, amongst the Pandavas. Let's not have war. They're, some of the same sentiments as Arjuna. Because after all, yes, they did this, and yes, they did that, and yes, but they're cousins. So there's a faction for that reason. So they were considering how to not have this war. It looks like there's going to be war. So Krishna volunteered because he knew what the answer would be. But it made it in the public eye, it also made it very clear, this person's impossible. I mean, thoughtful people would know it anyways, but he just made it very clear. Peace mission.
Can I ask one more
Yes,
question?
sure.
So in some instances, we see that Krishna is merciful, like in case
Oh,
of
he's always
Kesava.
merciful.
Like, even though he was so proud, though he was given an opportunity to know who Krishna was, and then immediately through Mother Saraswati, and then transform. But in some instances, the opportunity is not given. So again, does it
Wait. Give me an example where the opportunity is not given.
um, like in case of Shishupal? So I know he gave an opportunity, but then he didn't show any, like, not maybe Shishupal is not a good example, but I got it. Yeah.
I'm just questioning the premise before you go on to the punchline after the premise.
So I want to get to the point.
Because Krishna is always merciful. It's just his nature. How he exhibits that. Let's say, you're a nice devotee. We're trying to be nice devotees, at least. And misfortune comes. Why does misfortune come to somebody's? So that Krishna is not kind. That's why. Because if Krishna was kind, I wouldn't have misfortune. The misfortune has its purpose, merciful purpose, which we may not understand. So, rather than go down that path, you think of you probably have a good question. You just didn't express it completely yet. So mull it over. We're going to pass the microphone over to Sri Vrindavan.
Thank you, Maharaj.
You'll come up with a good one, I'm sure.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. I was just wondering, in the earlier part of the pastime, you were saying how these Digvijayis would conquer, and then the disciples of that person they conquered would become their disciples.
Yes.
So I was just wondering, like Prakashananda Saraswati, it said that he had 80,000 sannyasi disciples. Is it mentioned that he got disciples like this, like conquering other people?
I don't know if he was the conquering type or just the teacher type. There's no mention of being the conqueror type, but that doesn't mean he didn't do it. My understanding, at least, because it's absent, the other is absent, that he was just like a super brilliant, scholarly person. And in the way that pastime is told or narrated in Chaitanya Charitamrita is they were criticizing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But one of the things that Prakashananda Saraswati said to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was, "You don't come mix with us. You keep your distance from us. You're in the same Bharati sannyas order as us. So you don't mix with us. How come?" It's a kind of a criticism, but it's not like that. I want to bring you over to our team. It's just like just putting him down and see what his response would be. So the answer to your question is, as far as I know, he was just a scholar that was so vastly learned. He had so many students. Sannyas, and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya also. He was a grahastha, but he had thousands of sannyas students. That's a lot.
Maharaj, can I ask something more?
Yes.
About Saraswati, I'm not really very clear. The Saraswati who was on the tongue of Kesava Kashmiri
Was the material goddess Saraswati.
Of goddess of learning.
Not the goddess of learning has her spiritual counterpart in the spiritual world. Before there's even goddesses, before there's creation. Goddess of fortune, Saraswati. It's the spiritual prototype of the goddess of learning in the material field. So those who are worshippers of Saraswati, generally speaking, 99.999%, they're worshiping the material manifestation, the goddess of learning. And they want from her something. They do something to get something. That's their disposition. And so they honor. There's Saraswati Puja. It's it's a standard for persons in Brahmana communities. It's standard. Now, how much of that enters into the realm of understanding the spiritual potency, who she is the counterpart of or the manifestation of? Probably pretty thin.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I'm not able to frame the question right, but I want to just express my realization. I know Lord Chaitanya is Krishna himself, but it was amazing that they would have debate and person would accept the defeat and accept the discipleship. Nowadays I feel like people have their own concept and they don't want to change. They are like, there is a big block.
Yes.
When I have discussion with somebody, I feel like I'm just talking to the wall. They're not listening, they're just out. And I feel the same way sometimes I do that. Like when I'm listening to somebody, I get out and come back. So I just wanted to hear, how do we have conversation with somebody with a different background?
It starts with purity. Without purity, it's practice, but it's not going to have power without purity. And the purpose of discussion is not to convert or to transform or bring them from that ism to this ism or something like that. It's the confidence that Krishna is to be pleased, and you repeat with transparency Krishna's message, and that's the expectation. There's going to be some purification, however modest, quantitatively or qualitatively. It's a principle. So your function is not conversion. Your principle is to be an agent of this spiritual message with as much purity as you have the capacity for. And that in itself is disarming. That's, when you're having a discussion with somebody and their defenses are up, you feel it. But when you're having a discussion, your defenses aren't up, or another person, you can feel it, and vice versa. So if it's a target, and I'm going to go shoot you, you're the target, they feel it. So don't have that mindset. I just happened to be listening to the section of Prabhupada's recordings where it's conversations. And of course, he's Prabhupada and we're not Prabhupada. But it very much depends on the audience, but generally speaking, he would start up here. And he, kind of hold their feet to the coals if they said something. That they weren't following that something. He would, remind them, you have to follow. Otherwise, where's the purity? And if you can't have that purity, then how can you claim to be something that you're not? He wouldn't necessarily go really high. He would just I'm going to share a little anecdotal something. One of the airlines I travel primarily with is Southwest. And one of the rules with Southwest is there's no assigned seats. So I have found over time, I like sitting on an aisle seat, and somebody likes sitting in the window seat. And generally, if there's empty seats, it's going to be next to me because people don't want to sit next to me. I mean, they don't say that, but if there's an empty, if it's not a full flight, my seat's going to be empty. So one time I was flying from New York to Chicago, and sitting right next to me, just sat down next to me, was a young college girl from Columbia University. And she right away pulled out her Bible. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get saved. That wasn't her mood, but it just, that appeared to be, the body language, the gesture. And then we took off, and, she started asking, simple questions. Are you part of a religious organization? And I didn't give her my smart aleck answer. My smart aleck answer is, it's not Halloween. I didn't say that. Yes. And, then it was, did you start with this when you were young? No. What brought you to this position of going from that to this? And I gave, an honest answer. I mean, very simple. And I said, and I take it from you're sitting there with your Bible in your hand, you're a Christian, right? He said, yes. And, I said, what does it mean to be Christian? You follow the teachings of Christ, right? Now, the teachings of Christ adhere to the Ten Commandments, and one of the Ten Commandments is, thou shalt not kill. So you're Christian, and you're a follower of... So please, can you help me understand? Are you vegetarian, or do you maintain that standard? And she had this scriptural reason, that scripture, references from this and that, saying, they didn't say, but she was reading that it was okay. I mean, you can't be, one of the references was, you cannot be barred from the grace of God by your habits. Okay. So, but you're an educated young person. You have means to maintain yourself. Supposing Christ is carrying a lamb in his arms, and you ask Christ, can I have that lamb? I'd like to eat that lamb. What's he going to say? And she didn't know how to answer that one. But she said it wouldn't be against my Christian belief to make that request, and that Christ would give. I said, you ended, the plane was going to end, so I just said, or the flight was going to end, so I just said, please think it over. Your life as a Christian is to fulfill the instructions and please the person who you want to serve nicely. So think about it. It's not to say you can't be a religious person or a faithful person if you have this other standard. Anyway. You want to be a genuine person. What would Christ say if you asked him that question? So you don't have to ask him that question, but you're making choices in your the foods that you eat. It's just it's one item, but it's part of a relationship of faithfulness. Anyway, appeal to the reason. Thoughtful people. She chose to sit next to me. I didn't choose to sit next to her. And she chose to start the conversation up. I didn't. So something is there. Willingness. And I didn't get the vibe, I want to convert you. I just got, she was curious. With reason and good character. Both are strong to help people understand you're a person of good character, so speak and behave with good character and speak with reason. Humble persuasion is the method that Bhaktivinoda Thakur used, and we can follow that. And, the result is going to be what the result is. At least let them leave the situation thinking, here's a gentleman. He has good character. He's a refined person. I appreciate his qualities. Although what you may have said just bounced, they'll appreciate the Vaishnava quality. And that has traction. Something more? No. Yes?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I had a question about pride. And when I'm thinking about pride boiled down to its basic or a basic level is not so much about how you think or how one thinks about their own capabilities. It's more so about how everybody else thinks about your capabilities. It's easy to be proud when everybody else is proud for you. And it's easy to be negative when everybody else is. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's very hard to be proud of yourself when everybody else feels negative towards your scholarship, for example. And it's hard to feel negative about yourself when everybody else is happy about your scholarship. And my question is, how do you go about shutting off or at least turning down that valve where your actions and your beliefs of yourself aren't as influenced by...
The language of your question is important, so I want to catch it.
Sure.
Do it again.
So how do you go about not being as influenced of your own self-belief or your own your belief in your capabilities, your belief in yourself by the opinions or perceptions of others around you?
Well, the answer is simple, but achieving the answer is not so simple. It can be achieved by a spiritual conception of who you are. And when there's a spiritual conception of who you are, pride is thinking, I own that plume. It's I gave a whole seminar on pride. It was like several part seminar on pride. It's nice topic because pride is very destructive. So it's important to know what it is and how to, your question is all about, how to get beyond it. It's I and mine, aham and mama. The pride is mama, what's mine. But what's mine is not mine. It's Krishna's. And how do I understand what's Krishna's if I have a material conception of I? So humility, because there are two things. Amanidvam adambitvam. From Bhagavad Gita, you familiar with those terms? Look it up. Chapter 13, text 8. Items of knowledge, there's 20, because that's one of the questions at the beginning of chapter 13. What's knowledge and the object of knowledge? So Krishna is the object of knowledge. But knowledge is a list of 20 qualities. And the first two is humility and pridelessness, and they're not the same. Humility is what you think of yourself, and pride or pridelessness is what you think about mind, I and mine. So the mind rests upon I. If I'm this body, what's mine is what comes from this body. That's mine. My bank balance, my basketball skills, my grades in school, it's I and mine. It's a combo. So the way to deal with pride is to go to the spiritual, cultivate the spiritual conception consistently as possible. Now, one of the areas that distracts from that spiritual conception of self is how mind encroaches on the conception of I. Because mind is not mine. Mind is Krishna's. And Krishna may decorate with something. Some wealth, some ability, something. But it's Krishna's. And Krishna can take it away. Just like with this Kesava Kashmiri. He had this gift. And Saraswati took it away. He was speechless and bewildered. His mind went blank. It's specifically described in Chaitanya Bhagavat. His mind went blank. But not only his mouth went silent, his mind went blank. Because it was a gift that was withdrawn. So he was proud of something that wasn't his because of material conception of what's his, mine. And that's resting on the material conception of self. That's the root. You pull the root and you get the weed, the whole thing. You don't pull the root, then you can clip the top and it's going to come back again. Because the root's there. Now that's notional or theory, and then what about practice? How do you become humble, and how do you become prideless? That's another question. It's kind of what you're asking, but you go to the root. Keep asking. From here, I'm going to Virginia, because there's going to be the temple opening in Potomac. And while there, I'm going to be giving some classes at colleges. And one of the topics that the students ask for is, who am I? Because that's at the root. I mean, it's a philosophical question, but it's also a practical question. Because if you don't have a clear and right answer, pride is definitely going to be there, because you have something, and that something you have is mine. You want to hear Prabhupada's story about pride? Here's Prabhupada's story about pride. When Prabhupada was a young boy, he grew up in Calcutta. And his father was a Vaishnav. And many people from Bengal, when it's time for Jagannath Rath Yatra, they go to Puri to take part in Rath Yatra. So one year, the little boy, his father, when they took a train, because it's a direct train line that goes to Puri from Calcutta. And sometimes the train stops in India, and people get off. Not just people get off and on, but you just stop for a while and load cargo or whatever they do. So he got off the train, and he was walking around on the platform, the train platform, and he saw, this is Prabhupada narrating, he saw a very poor couple, and they had a burlap bag of some kind of cloth, and they were carefully counting their pieces of discarded wood, moving from here to there. They're counting the mine. And Prabhupada said, from that I could understand, even a pauper is proud of his penny. Mine. So we're proud of whatever we're proud of because the misconception of what's mine, it's I and mine. And the misconception of mind is rooted in the misconception of who I am. So it's kind of like fundamental, but fundamental things just get glossed over because we get maybe on a higher level of trying to do something, understand something, but we don't even have the mathematical calculation and a mistake at the beginning, so the answer is also going to be wrong. It's okay? The online question, then we're going to end, I think, I hope. It's a good thing I gave a short class, wasn't it?
Maharaj, Rajeshwari Prana Mataji is asking, do we know who is Kesava Kashmiri in Krishna Lila?
Could you speak without the microphone, please? Oh, Kesava Kashmiri and Krishna Lila. No, I don't know, but it's probably Gaura Gunadishtapika knows. If somebody has their little handheld device, they can go look it up. Prema Tarangani knows how to do those things. I don't know. Yes?
Maharaj, there is another question.
Another question.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, my level of enthusiasm goes down when I try to cultivate pridelessness.
Uh-oh.
How to maintain high enthusiasm at the same time acknowledging gift given by Krishna?
Get on a spiritual platform. Say it negatively. Don't get on a spiritual platform. What's going to happen? They're going down. They're trying to be humble and it's just going down. So that's not what humility is. But on the spiritual platform, we need mercy. I'm enthusiastic to get mercy, but I'm not taking ownership of mercy. It's mercy. Was that your question or somebody online? Okay. Okay, well, we're in suspense to find out who Kesava Kashmiri was in Krishna Lila, but we'll end there. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.